when a B-17 lost its landing gear. This pilot's emergency maneuver saved 10 crew. It sounds like an impossible feat of aviation. A 40,000-pound bomber, a fortress of aluminum and steel, designed to land on a robust tricycle undercarriage, touching down on nothing but its bare belly. A single mistake would mean a catastrophic fireball, the certain death of every man aboard. Yet, on one desperate afternoon in the autumn of 1944, this precise nightmare scenario unfolded over the skies of East Anglia. The pilot faced a seemingly unsolvable equation of physics, engineering, and raw human courage. With 10 lives in his hands and a wounded aircraft as his only tool, he would have to engineer a miracle. This is the story of a Boeing B-17G flying fortress, its crew, and the commander who defied the odds to bring them home. The date is October 27, 1944. The place, the 447th Bombardment Group's base at RAF Rattlesden, Suffolk, England. The war in Europe has entered a critical phase. Following the breakout from Normandy, Allied armies are pushing towards the German border, but the Third Reich is far from defeated. Its industrial heartland, protected by a formidable wall of flak and fighters, remains the primary target of the United States Army Air Force's mighty 8th Air Force. On this morning, the target was the massive Henschel tank assembly plant in Kassel, Germany, a heavily defended objective deep in enemy territory. Among the hundreds of fortresses thundering down the runway at dawn was B-17G serial number 43 to 38,334, nicknamed Slicks Chicks 2. Its crew of 10 was a mix of experience and fresh faces, led by 24-year-old First Lieutenant John Jack R. Murphy, a pilot from Chicago whose calm demeanor belied his youth. His co-pilot was Second Lieutenant Robert Bobby D. Hatch, the navigator First Lieutenant Samuel R. Stuller, and the bombardier Second Lieutenant Raymond G. Burns. In the rear, the 6 enlisted men, the engineer, radio operator, ball turret gunner, waist gunners, and tail gunner, completed the tight-knit team. The mission to Kassel was, in the grim parlance of the air war, a milk run that went sour. Initial flak was light, and the bomb run was successful. But on the turn for home, the German defenses awoke with a vengeance. A concentrated box of flak exploded directly in front of Slicks Chicks 2. The aircraft shuddered violently as jagged steel fragments ripped through its skin. Damage was immediate and severe. 2 engines were streaming oil, the hydraulic lines were severed, and, most critically, shrapnel had smashed into the nose wheel well, jamming the front landing gear in its housing and shredding the tires. The main gear indicators, however, still showed green, a small mercy, or so they thought. Murphy and Hatch fought to stabilize the shuddering bomber. They feathered the 2 damaged engines, conserving fuel and reducing drag. The intercom crackled with damage reports from the crew stations, superficial wounds, minor cuts from plexiglass and metal, but thankfully no serious casualties. The aircraft was still flyable, but she was bleeding altitude and speed. For 3 long, anxious hours, the crippled fortress droned westward across the continent and over the white-capped waters of the Channel, every man silently willing the straining engines to hold. As the green fields of England finally emerged from beneath the clouds, a collective but tense relief washed over the crew. They were over friendly territory. They had survived the flak and the fighters. Now, all that remained was to land. Lieutenant Murphy contacted Rattlesden Tower, declaring an emergency and reporting his battle damage. He requested a long, clear approach and emergency vehicles on standby. The tower controller's voice was calm and professional, guiding them in. It was during the pre-landing checklist that the true, horrifying scope of their problem was revealed. Co-pilot Bob Hatch cycled the landing gear lever. The familiar whine of the hydraulic motors was absent, replaced by a sickening, grinding crunch from the belly of the aircraft. The main gear indicators, which had remained stubbornly green, now flickered and went red. A visual check by the waist gunners confirmed the worst. Pause, neither the left nor the right main landing gear had deployed. The hydraulic system was utterly destroyed. They were not coming in on a damaged nose gear. They were coming in with no gear at all. A cold dread, far colder than the high-altitude air, gripped the cockpit. A wheels-up landing in a B-17 was a maneuver with a notoriously low success rate. The massive fuel tanks in the wings could rupture on impact, the bomb bay could buckle, and the friction of aluminum on concrete could generate sparks that would turn the aircraft into an instant inferno. Standard procedure dictated bailing out over friendly territory. But here, Murphy faced a brutal calculus. They were low on altitude and fuel, and his ball turret gunner was still in his station, a position that had to be manually rotated and the gunner extracted before a bailout. With the aircraft's instability, organizing a safe, orderly exit for 10 men was a perilous gamble. The alternative was to attempt the nearly impossible. "Tower, this is Slick's Chicks." Murphy's voice was steady, betraying none of the turmoil within. "Confirm visual negative on all gear. Repeat, we have a total gear failure. We're going to attempt a belly landing. Have your foam trucks ready." The announcement over the intercom was met with a stark silence. Each man was left alone with his thoughts, staring at the flak-scarred interior of the fuselage that had been their home, now potentially their coffin. The ball turret gunner, realizing his precarious situation, began the laborious process of cranking his turret to align the escape hatch. On the flight deck, Murphy and Hatch ran through every emergency manual procedure. They tried the manual hand crank for the gear. It was frozen solid, bent metal locking it in place. They tried blipping the engines, using torque and G-forces to shake the gear loose. Nothing. The gears were dead. Below them, RAF Rattle's den transformed into a hive of controlled panic. Fire engines, their sirens wailing, sped to positions along the main runway. Ambulances followed. Foam trucks began laying down a thick, white chemical blanket on the tarmac to suppress sparks. Every non-essential personnel was cleared from the area. On the control tower, officers watched through binoculars, their faces grim. They had seen bombers come home with terrible wounds, but a total gear failure on a bird this heavy was a death sentence more often than not. Inside Slick's Chicks 2, Murphy began his final approach. His mind worked with a terrifying clarity. He had one advantage, the B-17's design. Its fuselage was strong, and its belly was relatively flat. But he had to touch down with absolute precision. Too steep an angle and the nose would dig in, causing a violent somersault. Too shallow, and they would skip and bounce, losing control. Speed was everything. He needed to come in as slow as possible without stalling. He ordered full flaps to increase lift and drag, allowing a slower approach speed. He and Hatch held the control yokes with a firm, steady pressure. "Okay, boys." Murphy's voice came over the intercom, calm and clear. "Brace for impact. Assume crash positions. We're bringing her in." The crew assumed their positions, leaning forward, heads down, arms interlocked for support. They flew over the perimeter fence, so low they could see the individual faces of the fire crews staring up. The runway stretched out before them, a gray ribbon of hope and terror. The deafening roar of the two remaining engines dropped to a whisper as Murphy pulled the throttles to idle. The world narrowed to the view from the windshield. The concrete rushed up to meet them. There was no more time for thought, only instinct. At precisely 1,527 hours, the keel of the Boeing B-17 made first contact with the foam-covered runway of RAF Rattle's den. It was not the catastrophic, shrieking tear of metal they had feared. It was a deep, grinding groan, a sound felt in the bones more than heard. A shower of brilliant orange sparks, hundreds of them, erupted from the port side as the belly skin made contact, cascading past the waist windows like deadly fireflies. The aircraft shuddered violently, threatening to slew to the left. Murphy and Hatch fought the controls, using differential engine power from their two good engines and careful rudder input to keep the massive bomber tracking straight down the center line. The true danger now was the fuel. Thousands of gallons of high-octane aviation fuel sloshed in the wing tanks, separated from the friction of the runway by only a few millimeters of aluminum. Every spark was a potential fuse. The foam trucks raced alongside, spraying their chemical blanket directly into the maelstrom of sparks. Inside, The noise was apocalyptic, a grinding, screeching, thunderous protest of a machine being subjected to forces it was never designed to endure. For 800 yards, the fortress slid, a 30-ton projectile shedding its skin. The ball turret was sheared clean off. The ventral radio antenna and various hatches were ground away. But the core structure, the main spars of the wings and the robust fuselage frame, held. Murphy's masterful, featherlight touchdown had prevented a fatal dig-in. His precise control kept them from cartwheeling. As speed bled away, the shuddering began to subside. The screech lowered in pitch. Finally, with a last lurch and a final groan of tortured metal, Slicks Chicks 2 came to a complete stop, silent and steaming, on the center of the runway. For a moment, there was absolute, stunned silence within the fuselage, broken only by the hiss of hot metal and the distant sound of approaching sirens. Then, Murphy's voice, tight with emotion but firm with command. "Everyone okay?" "Sound off." One by one, from the nose to the tail, 10 voices called out. Shaken, bruised, cut by flying debris, but alive. The rear hatch was flung open, and acrid smoke poured in, followed by the shouts of ground crew. The men scrambled out, sliding down the angled fuselage onto the foam-slicked concrete, gulping in the cold English air. They were met by medics and firefighters, but their escape had been unassisted. All 10 crew members had walked away. The aftermath on the runway was a scene of devastation and triumph. Slicks Chicks 2 sat, a proud warrior brought low but not defeated. Her belly was shredded, her underside mangled, but her cabin and wings were intact. The fire crews, having prevented any post-crash fire, doused the hot metal as a precaution. The investigation that followed confirmed the totality of the damage: complete hydraulic failure, both main gear assemblies jammed by twisted metal, the nose gear destroyed. The post-mission report would state, in dry, official language, that First Lieutenant Murphy's exceptional airmanship and cool judgment under extreme duress resulted in the preservation of a valuable aircraft and the safe recovery of its entire crew. For his actions that day, First Lieutenant John R. Murphy was awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross. The citation highlighted his professional skill, determination, and devotion to duty. His crew, each man having performed his own role with discipline under unimaginable pressure, shared in the honor of their survival. The aircraft itself, though repaired, would never fly another combat mission. It was eventually relegated to stateside training duties, a fate far nobler than the scrap heap it so narrowly avoided. The belly landing of Slicks Chicks 2 became a legend within the 447th Bomb Group, a textbook example of cockpit resource management and raw piloting courage. It demonstrated that even in the face of a mechanical catastrophe deemed unsurvivable, human skill, nerve, and a steadfast commitment to one's crew could alter the equation. It was a single, shining moment in the vast, dark tapestry of the air war, where 10 men, against impossible odds, rode a fortress of sparks to a second chance at life. This was just one of countless untold stories from the Second World War. A story not of a major battle, but of a single aircraft, a single crew, and 10 minutes of sheer terror and brilliance over a quiet English field. Subscribe to World War II Records as we continue to bring these forgotten chapters of history back to life.